Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this very special gathering. Today, we come together to recognize 3 distinguished alumni and icons of nursing, and to celebrate Black History Month, and to officially kick off the Centennial Year of the Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing. From the early days of Lakeview Hospital, to the old nursing building on main campus, and now to this wonderful building, the nursing school at Case Western Reserve University has stood the test of time. We know, though, that academic buildings and classrooms, simulation labs, and research facilities are only half of that story. It's the people who make history. It's the young people who come here as students to learn and grow, and who leave here as well-prepared, empathic, and confident nurses. And it's our alumni who continue to exemplify the best qualities of nursing as leaders throughout the world. While it has been 100 years since Frances Payne Bolton made her gift to establish the School of Nursing here at Case Western Reserve, it's been a century of steady progress and incredible milestones. As you'll hear from these 3 women today, that progress and momentum can take many forms. And nurses, especially nurses of color, must overcome countless hurdles in order to achieve great things. So with that, it's my honor now to introduce Provost Ben Vinson III, himself an accomplished historian and leadership expert, who will introduce our panel.
Dean Musil, thank you so much. Members of the audience, I am absolutely delighted to be here with you this afternoon. This is an important celebration of Black history, but it is also an incredible celebration of milestones, celebrating Black pioneers in the field of nursing. I, for one, and it's perhaps because one of my close aunts, is and was a nurse herself, that I have been raised to believe that nursing is something that should be held sacred to all of us. And I certainly believe that really what we've endured with the COVID-19 pandemic, it really highlighted the real halo that surrounds this profession. There is simply no other profession that is more thoughtful and more selfless in its care than the field of nursing. And I am intensely grateful to each and every one of you for your work in this incredible field, your commitment, as well as your commitment to our university, Case Western Reserve University, itself a pioneer in the profession. It is my pleasure to introduce today's esteemed panelists. In the interest of time, I will keep these introductions brief, but I could go on and on and on about their accomplishments. Up first is Barbara Nichols. Barbara is a 1966 graduate of Case Western Reserve University. She later went on to earn a master's degree from the University of Wisconsin, and she made history as the first African American to lead the Wisconsin Nursing Association and the prestigious American Nursing Association. She held terms as president for both of these organizations. Barbara, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for everything that you have done to the field. Up next is May Wykle. May is a distinguished nursing leader and educator, as well as an internationally recognized expert in geriatric and mental health nursing. She is the first African American dean of our School of Nursing, and she is the first African American woman in nursing to have an endowed chair named after her at a major research university in the United States. May, thank you as well for everything that you've done for Case Western Reserve University and for everything that you've accomplished as a leader and educator. And last but not least, joining us via Zoom is Betty Smith-Williams. Betty holds the incredible distinction as the first African-American nurse to graduate from our prestigious School of Nursing. She later became the first Black person to teach at the collegiate level in the entire state of California. She is a co-founder of the National Black Nurses Association and a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing. Betty, for you online today, we're grateful to you for your pioneering spirit and for breaking barriers for nurses around the globe. And of course, leading our panel today is Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Camille Warner. Camille, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Provost Vinson and Dean Musil. I would like to welcome everyone and say that I'm honored to have our Black History event serve as the kickoff celebration for the FPB School of Nursing's 100th year anniversary. This is a monumental event, and these three Black history makers are an integral part of that legacy. Before we get to our esteemed panel, I want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank those individuals who have helped to make this program possible, specifically the work of the FPB Centennial Planning Committee, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Board, and special shout-outs to Dedra Hannah Adams and Maureen Kendall, who helped keep me together. I would also like to thank our audience online and their members of historically Black colleges and universities who have tuned in today, so thank you. I also want to thank Sora Janice Eatman, who will be here with some students from Cleveland Metropolitan School Districts. So today we have three Black history makers who have paved the way and continue to serve as role models and mentors to those who have come after them in the profession of nursing and beyond. Their outreach has touched lives and made positive impacts on those around them. And they remind us and inspire us to be history makers too. I will be the moderator for today's program, and the format will consist of prepared questions for each of the panelists to answer, and then we will allow some questions from the audience. However, we will have Trifine and Maureen go around and collect those questions. If you could please write them on the index cards in front of you. Afterwards, we will be graced with the vocal talents of Miss Angela Carpenter and Mrs. Cookie Shade, followed by a wonderful soul food reception by Dale's Catering in our Winter Gardens. So I will take a seat and join two of our panelists and start the questions. Dr. Williams, I'm going to start with you. And the first question, can you hear me okay? Put this
A little louder, please.
Okay.
Did you say Williams?
I said indeed, Dr. Betty Smith-Williams.
I couldn't hear that, so that was a good question. Okay.
So could you tell us a little bit about how you navigated the challenges on your path to leadership?
There were so many different interesting challenges on you calling it my path to leadership. Of course, I have been fortunate to have the support and the development of a loving, caring, giving family and a pathway that they provided for me in my life. And I think that is substantive here in supporting. You know, how I need to tell you about this is how I got to Case Western Reserve. I had attended universities schools all my life where I had not had teachers who were Black, I'll say. I went to mixed schools all my life in Indiana, from kindergarten through. And then when I went to Howard University, I received my first education from a Black faculty. And this was an exciting life change for me. I majored in zoology, I was pre-med, I was gonna do this. But in 1950, when I graduated, I had changed my ideas about what I wanted to do. And I had learned about nursing from a friend of my sister's who lived in Cleveland, who was a visiting nurse. So I was interested and I heard about it. But when I studied up, I found out only 2 schools would give me a master's degree. I could go into the master's in nursing program. That was Yale University and Francis Payne Bolton, case reserved. So I applied to only one of those schools, which was Case, because I decided I would move back toward Indiana, which is my birthplace and my home. So I only applied to Case. And when I made my application, I was very surprised that they asked me then to take a special competency test, a standardized test over in Baltimore. I was in Washington then. I don't know what I was doing, working. And then I took this special competency test, and they asked these, which I passed. And Cleveland councilwoman who was very prominent there, who was a friend of my sister's, was contacted by her, and she told her the situation, that they're hesitating on my application. And then something happened, which I'd never have heard the detail, but I was admitted to the School of Nursing at Francis Payne Bolton. So that's how I got there. It wasn't a big deal. I didn't even know that much about it, but I found it very pleased. I was very, very comfortable at FPB. I'd gone to school with all mixed people all my life, and that's what I was accustomed to, and so that's how I moved in here now. You asked me another question.
Well, it was your challenges on your path to leadership.
Yeah, and so the path, my challenges are hard to speak to. I grew up as an active kid, leader. I belonged to all the clubs and organizations. My mother was very active socially and in the NACP and an organization and politically. So I came up in an activist environment and was accustomed to working through organizations. I saw them as a mechanism for change. And so I had used those interests and organization to help me get leadership, to get roles. I saw it as a way to make change. I like to have a lot of friends, different types of friends who could do things. And we did things in South Bend years ago when we were children, and then we did it all our lives. So I use really the tools I had been given, which were life skills, basically, to help me to face any problem of leadership, whether it was in those early years when I was a youngster and then in college and building the organizations which I started, the Black nurses and so forth. I've always used this group kind of approach and have enjoyed working with people and saw the value in pushing the development of programs by the people. And it's probably that is the most important thing that I had as a skill.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. Dr. Nichols, would you like to address that same question? How did you navigate the challenges on your path to leadership?
I was born and grew up in Maine, and sort of like Betty, Maine is known still in 2023 as the most white state in the nation, 99% white, Now I guess it's 100% since I'm not there. I went to nursing school in Boston, and then upon graduation, I joined the Navy to see the world, which was the slogan at that time. And I went from Boston to New York. And at the hospital, St. Albans Naval Hospital, they had 100 nurses, and 99 had bachelor's degree, and the only one without a bachelor's degree was Barbara Ware. My maiden name was Ware. So I decided the Navy could send me to school, but you had to apply. You couldn't choose the school, and they had all of these regulations. So I determined I would get out and pick a school for myself. And I intended to go back to Boston, but then I decided I wanted to go west. So I applied and was accepted at the University of San Francisco, California School of Nursing. But my mom ended up having uterine cancer surgery, and so I decided after her chemo that I would stay closer and I wouldn't go so far west. So I picked Western Reserve because it was west, meaning I didn't understand geography. And that when I got here, was shocked to find Ohio is still east of the Mississippi. So I would say that the challenges that I have met along the way, I've responded to, I would say, Carl Rogers' theory. You know, Carl Rogers has written most of his theory of psychotherapy through observation and reflection. And that's been a very big part of my learning and understanding. And I would like to make this point. When I became president of the Wisconsin Nurses Association, I went from there to the ANA Board of Directors. And I observed, and I said, well, good googalamooga. Need some dumb people here. And they're in the leadership role. And I think I can do this. And then I realized that when you're in a leadership role, at least at ANA, the whole organization is committed to making you look good because you are the symbol of the profession. You cannot afford to look bad. So I said, hey, Nichols, you can get some of this training. So it was through observation. And when I decided to run for the American Nurses Association presidency, I was on the board, and not one board member supported me. They all said, well, you don't look presidential, right? Another way of saying, well, you're not white, but they didn't say that. Because I said, well, what does a president look like? And they said, well, not like you because, you know, you sleep through all the meetings, which was true. They were very boring. And my response was, well, I'm awake now. And I'm ready to go. So it was very interesting. I ran. The Wisconsin nurses were fabulous. They raised $10,000 for my campaign. And we didn't have any money, but Oscar Myers was in Madison. And Oscar Myers gave us free cheese and hot dogs for the reception that I had to have. And the nurses carried the free cheese and hot dogs in their suitcases to Hawaii. We probably wouldn't be let on the plane at this point with our cheese and hot dogs. But we had a wonderful reception with wine and cheese and hot dogs. And I won. And then, of course, once you win, everyone supported me, right? I was absolutely fabulous. They absolutely knew that I was going to do this. What I observed and why I ran when I was on the ANA board was that, one, as I've already told you, the A&A supports you in terms of getting the requisite skills to be successful. So I said, well, I've never done public speaking. So they found me a public coach. And the person who coached me in public speaking, I don't remember the lady's name, but what I do remember is she was a private friend of Eleanor Roosevelt. And she would give me little tidbits about what she advised Eleanor. And the 3 things she said you must do as a leader. 1, no matter how bad the situation, your job is to tell the truth, but with inspiration. Nobody wants a leader whining and groaning about how awful it is and what we're going to do. You have to say, yes, these times are bad, but I am confident that, that we will succeed. Thank you, Miss Roosevelt. The second thing she said is, you, particularly because you're a person of color, you cannot not afford to be prepared because no one thinks you should be here. So you have to do your homework and you have to bring knowledge to this endeavor. And third, she said, A&A has all of the staff, have them prepare for you research papers on the 3 major topics in nursing. And then you memorize those. And then it's like when you go to meetings, people will think you're speaking extemporaneously, but you have memorized all of this data from these prepared things, and you use them over and over. When you have a press conference, when you speak at a school of nursing, when you do this or that, you're speaking from those prepared items. And then guess what? Eventually you know them. And you can emphasize this or not emphasize that. So I would say I thank A&A really for giving me sort of the ropes to know and not to know. Because one of the challenges you have when you're a person of color is there is no one of color to help you to learn the ropes. And so that was very helpful to me. So that's what I would say. Now, how did I get to Case? Well, as I said, I got here by accident because I thought I was going west. And so my journey at Case was very good because Rosella Schlotfeld was dean. And on day 1, we were the returning baccalaureate students. And we were not with the general students. You step in the class, she taught trends and issues. She said, okay. I can see she's tapping her foot. Okay, we have to do all this unlearning. You're not a professional without a degree. I don't care what they told you in that diploma school. You will be a professional when you leave here. And by the way, you need to go on and get your doctorate. This was day 1. And I'm thinking, can I get the bachelor's degree first? So she set the bar high. And then while I was here, I became president of the Hampton Nuttings Club. The Hampton Nuttings Club was named after the 2 great leaders in nursing who had relationships over time with Case Western Reserve, and that was the nursing organization. And one of the, I don't know what it's called now, it's probably called the nursing organization, but it was the Hampton Nutting Club, and we were called the Hampton Nuts. And one of the things that the Hampton Nuts did every year is we had a meeting with Frances Payne Bolton. And we had a high tea with her. And the dean would call me in and said, okay, you're not gonna embarrass me. Bring me this dress or suit that you're gonna wear because you must be dressed properly. And I don't want you sitting there like a slug. I want you to prepare questions because you know the students freeze up. And so you're the leader, you gotta act like a leader. So she approved my dress, told me I had to have pearls. I didn't have any. She went and found some pearls and loaned them to me for the day. So I was properly attired. And we went through these questions. And we had always a very nice reception with Mrs. Bolton. And Rosella would say, "You did good. You didn't embarrass me." Doing good meant I didn't embarrass her. So I think those were some of the challenges. I would say the final one is at every level in leadership positions that I've had, there's always been, again, since I learned mostly from observation and reflection, what I would call the level of low expectation. Oh, you talk so well and proper. Come on, I'm a college graduate. Is that unusual? I don't know, I guess so. In other words, oh, how do you know that? Because guess what? Barbara can read. I mean, it's this level of low expectation that appears that basically says, from a theoretical and an ideological standpoint of view, there is nothing in your experience that prepares you for this kind of leadership role. And there's basically shock that you can perform in a competent and comprehensive way. Mm-hmm. But I give a lot to really observation and reflection has been the best way that I have met the challenges. And what I've discovered is that in many instances, people do not do their homework. And that's when they fail. And I would say, Dean Schlotfeld was one in terms of encouraging you to do your homework. And then the final thing I will say, she was the author of the ANA 1965 paper, which said, baccalaureate education should be entry into practice. And that was excruciatingly, exceedingly controversial. And during my presidency, the ANA had passed a resolution, listen to this, that said, by 1985, baccalaureate education will be entry into practice. Honey, ANA lost half of its membership on that requirement because organized medicine said, Barbara Nichols' interpretation, a diller a dollar, a nurse is no scholar, you do not need to be educated, just do as you're trained. So I think I give a lot of credit to Dr. Schlotfeld for pushing that idea, articulating that idea, but more importantly, helping the profession to put it into action. And I think that's a wonderful contribution that Case has made to the profession.
Thank you, Dr. Nichols. Dean Wykle, what were some challenges on your journey to leadership?
Well, I have a lot of notes because I'm getting at that age. I have to remember. But what I want to say is it's really nice that we're kicking off the 100-year history of FPB with Black History Month. I think that's marvelous. Now, I knew Frances Payne Bolton. I'm not 100 years old yet, but I did know Frances Payne Bolton. And I think it's wonderful that we can celebrate the accomplishments of those that are Black and come from the Frances Payne Bolton School of Nursing. And I always say I meet challenges because God orders my steps. Mm-hmm. Because I grew up in small town, southern Appalachia, Ohio. And it was different because I grew up when bias was legal. And they wanted to have, you're supposed to have 2 separate but equal schools. But they said they couldn't afford it. So therefore, we got to go to an integrated school. So I'm like, Barbara, I went to an integrated school from kindergarten on up because they couldn't afford it. Now, when I got to high school, I did well in high school. And the other thing that happened was there weren't a lot of Blacks in Appalachia. I said I grew up on country western music. And when I got to Cleveland, people would ask me to say things like Crick and John because I had this southern accent, southwest from Ohio. So But my biggest shock, I did along well in school, but my biggest shock was when we went on our senior trip and we went to Washington, D.C. We were not allowed to eat in the dining room in the hotel where we stayed, and we were not allowed to go to the amusement park where all the students went because it was segregated in our capital. And it was such a shock to me because I grew up with these kids. We ate lunch together every day, and we couldn't do that. The nicest thing that happened, though, is the waiters in the hotel we had to eat in our rooms, and they would bring up these big trays with silver tops and the best steaks in the hotel. So we did that well. So when I graduated from high school, I thought about going to medical school, and then I needed a job. So I went to Martins Ferry Hospital to work as a nurse's aide, and they said, "We don't have any room for you here." And I went there because I thought, well, that's what I would like to do, to learn about nursing and healthcare. And so I often tell this story that my dad, when he was born, was named after the doctor that delivered him. And he happened to be head of the hospital. And he found out that I was looking for a job, and he said, "Well, you do have one." So I started as a nurse's aide, and I had to work as a nurse's aide for over a year to prove myself before they would even think about me going into, they had a nursing hospital school of nursing. And so when I came to work as a nurse's aide, the whole hospital threatened to strike. They said, "If you bring her in here, we are striking." But I didn't know that, thank goodness. But I worked with a class with one of the nurses' aides who said, "We were going to strike if you came here." And she said, "But after working with you, you're not so bad." So I thought my memoir is going to be titled, "You're Not So Bad." So I worked there, and they got a new director of nursing education. And I applied at Akron. Akron said, "No, you can't come because we don't have a roommate for you. You cannot room with any of the other students." And so this lady she came from Columbus, and she said, "Of course you can come in here." Of course, I had to take an exam that lasted all day long. But one of the things that I did in small town schools was, they like science, so I was able to pass that. And when we affiliated at Cleveland Metropolitan Hospital, and I had never seen a black nurse before in my life. It was like, aha, it does happen. But people would stop me and say, "You're from Martins Ferry? What are you, the mascot?" And so, you go through a lot of those trials. But I ended up coming back to Cleveland because, Cleveland was a big town from Martins Ferry. And I said, it's like, how are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Perry? I thought, I'm going to Cleveland. So I worked at Cleveland Psychiatric Institute. And I was there as a staff nurse, head nurse, supervisor. And then they decided that I could teach. We had affiliations from all over the place to come there. And I thought, well, I need to go back to school. And so from the time I came to Cleveland, I went part-time at Case Western Reserve University. But like Barbara, when I wanted to come into the nursing school, they said, well, you can't come in with the generic students. You have to come with a special class. And it's really interesting that when I graduated, we were not allowed to have the school pin.
Right.
And we were not allowed to have our pictures taken.
Right.
But we could have a diploma. Well, that's what I wanted, was a diploma.
And I said, "Who wants that old pin?"
And what is interesting, later on as I was teaching, I thought, well, I need to go back to school if I'm going to teach. So I got into the master's program in psych, because psych was one place where they could take African American students. And I don't think that because you know psych, you're more tolerant or whatever. And so I graduated from the master's program, and the day before I graduated, Rosella Schlotfeld, wonderful Rosella, called me down and said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go work at Fairview Park," because they had a diploma school of nursing. She said, "Well, I want you to come here." She said, "Now, I can't give you much money," and that was true, "but I want you to come here." And I said, "Oh my," because I was sitting in the office of the dean, and I said, "Well, I appreciate it, Rosella, and I hope I can be as good as you are. And she said, if you're half as good, you'll still be as good as me. Because that was Rosella. That was the way she was. So when I was in psych nursing, taught here, I was called the psych nurse integrator, and that meant I integrated the physical and mental health. So I worked all over university hospitals working with the nurses. So therefore, I got elected to a lot of offices from the GCNA, from alumni, because they knew me. They didn't know what I knew, but they did know me, kind of thing. So I continued in psych, and I worked with the faculty, and we talked a lot about integration back in those days, because as you have to remember, it was a different way of life. And I became the head of the psych department. Now here's a challenge. We had the experiment, and that is that they thought that you could be head of the psych department at the school and director of nursing of Hannah Pavilion, the psych. So they said, you're going to have both jobs. And it's 50 and 50. But it was 100 and 100. I mean, I'm teaching and they're telling me that the fire alarm has gone off at Hannah Pavilion. So it was a great experience, but it was part of the experiment where they had the professor directors as head of the hospitals. I think we did a really good job myself, but it was very challenging. And so after working for a while, I decided I needed to go get a PhD. Well, you couldn't get a PhD at the School of Nursing because you just didn't get a PhD where you worked. So I got a PhD in higher ed, which was fine, it really fit. So I said to myself, I keep going to school. And they said, well, now that you have your doctorate, you need a postdoc. And I said, Lord, I asked you to get me through the BS program. I asked you to and after I finished my master's, I said, I'm okay, Lord, I'm on my own. When I got into the PhD program, I said, scratch that, Lord, I need you to get me through the PhD program. And then after the PhD program, I had a geriatric mental health academic award, a postdoc with NIA. The psych department. And so I learned, that's how I started my research, that's how I started writing, that's how I became director of the University Center on Aging and Health. And then I was working with Joyce Fitzpatrick, who pushed me to do all kinds of things. She sent me to Africa, I went to Botswana, I went all those places. It was a great experience. And she sent me to Harvard, because she wanted me to learn about being a dean, even though she wasn't planning to retire, but she was good at giving me those kind of opportunities. And then I went to her one day and said, I need my sabbatical, and so I went down to Americus, Georgia, and worked with Rosalind Carter in the Caregiving Institutes. So I had all these experiences, but here was my big challenge. While I was down there, Sigma Theta Tau called, and I'd been active in Sigma because I was one of the charter members of Alpha Mu at Case. And I said, they want you to run for president. And I said, are you kidding? I said, I'm down here working in Georgia. I learned a lot about race relations in Americus, Georgia, too. But I said, well, I don't think I could do that. And they said, well, but we need to have an African-American run because we want to prove that we're open to everything. So I said, okay, you can put me down, and they wrote all this kind of stuff. And as I said, I'll never become president of Sigma Theta Tau International. So I went to the convention, and I had all these wonderful colleagues that would go over saying, make my day with May, all this. And so I thought nothing of it, because I liked the woman that was running against me, and I said, she loves Sigma, and she can do well. Well, I won. I wasn't even there when they announced it. She came and knocked on my door and said, you won. I said, won what? So my challenge then was to be president of Sigma Theta Tau, and then when I came back to Case, becoming the dean at Case. So I had another 50-50, which was 100 and 100 kind of thing. But Sigma was really good. I got a lot of international travel. I've traveled to many countries. I got to meet Princess Anne and the Princes of Thailand. And so the experience has been wonderful. And that's why I say that with the Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing, it really did give us the opportunity so that you're able to meet some of the challenges. And one of the things that I liked about Francis Payne Bolton, and that's why I say the wheel came full circle, Francis Payne Bolton introduced the Cadet Nurses Act. Remember that? The Cadet Nursing Act. And because Martins Ferry was so frugal, they still had money from the Cadet Nurses Act, and that's one of the ways that I got into the Hospital School of Nursing. Never dreaming that one day I would be at the Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing. And she was good. She was the one that helped the first African-American nurse corps go overseas, even though they weren't allowed to do anything but deliver mail. They weren't allowed to nurse. They recently got a medal for that too, didn't they, Barbara? But that's all they were allowed to do. And she was adamant that any school that got money from the cadet nurses had to integrate. And that's one of the reasons why. So she was very, very influential in nursing. And as I said, I knew her, and we used to go to Franny P's for tea. That's what we'd say.
Yeah.
She'd have us come to the tea, and she would serve the tea. And she had a very deep voice. And she would always say, Rosella, I know how you like these highfalutin professional grads, but remember the bedside nurse. So she was really interesting. The other challenge that I had was making sure that we brought more African Americans into nursing. And I really worked very hard on that. At first, they didn't meet the criteria. And I said, if you allow me to bring in African American nurses on provision, and if they make it through the first semester, will you accept them? And Rosella said yes. And so we never lost a single student, and so we began seeing many more African Americans. And by that time, the bias was kind of over. And we really did have a nice time. So I learned a lot about nursing and accepted some of the challenges, and that's what we have to do. You have to accept the challenge and try it, because you don't know what it's going to be like. I had no idea what it'd be like to be president of an international organization and dean at the same time. But I had wonderful colleagues, a wonderful development staff, wonderful faculty, and someone said to me once, do you like being the dean? And I said, I like being the dean, because you certainly could help people and bring them along. And so those are some of my challenges. I could talk all afternoon, but I won't. Let you know what some of my challenges were.
Thank you so much, Dean Wykle. I'm going to ask a question now, and Dr. Williams, I'm going to ask you first, what do you perceive as the most pressing issues facing nurses today?
That's a $64 question, really. I think we continue to have such big problems in terms of health equity and justice for health care for all of the people. And that this is of prime importance to me and has taken really my attention throughout life. I have been organizing nurses to take action, to get education, to build yourself up, to support one another. Mm-hmm. Of all the races, and we have created the National Coalition of Ethnic Minority Nurses Association, which means all of the 5 major groups who have been left out are working together, and this celebrates their 25th year of working together as organizations to bring their people along. It's really been a people thing for me. And I think we need to learn how to do that increasingly successful. We need to increase the numbers of people who follow you, May, and the rest of who come along. Really to see nursing as more than giving injections and washing bodies and so forth and so on, which is, of course, has never been my focus or interest. It's been health care and health promotion and so forth. And I think it continues to be. We know people are living in drastic circumstances. Uh, Sanitation, we need to be more politically active as nurses and demand what we want from, and be a part of the action. In fact, we need to become policymakers. And so that we establish criterion and opportunities for people to live a healthier life. I really think that these are the important things that we nurses continue to need to have. We've sort of, from, like nursing has been like, they started out with assistant to handmaidens to doctors, and then we moved into different dimensions of those definitions. And we still have a great deal to go to attain real health care for our nurses and also for me is for the ethnic people, all the people, regardless of their ethnicity, so that they can have decent health care and justice in attaining it. And that's our pressing issue as I see it today. And so how it comes about and how you work toward it, I was very interested in hearing how different systems helped Barbara to go through her channels, and May came through a little different channel, and I was years ahead of that.
Right.
See, and actually years ahead of that, and came on out to California, and nobody was organized when I came out here. They didn't even have anybody teaching in a school. When I'm the first person who taught in a accredited nursing program and a baccalaureate program in the state of California. The only reason they hired me was they had to have a person who had the credentials, which I had, to approve them for public health nursing in the school. That was what was the issue. That's why I was hired, because had a master's, and at that time in the 50s, that was a long time ago. You think about how old you were. And so for me to go teaching nursing in a baccalaureate program in 54, there weren't anybody else around who had those kind of degrees.
That's right.
It's kind of, I'm very interested in how your lives move forward away from, but all touch reserve. I touched it by being in there at one point, but you really took the courses, had different programs that you participated and showed examples that of how your work was applied to the people who needed it at that time. And that's very interesting. Barbara and I have a long old history, because see, when she was president, she appointed me on the International Committee for ICN, I think it was. Barbara was able to appoint me, and I had run for national treasurer, but I was off in California doing all kind of different things. But always my best shot was using a whole lifetime of organized work that I had learned to do with clubs and local clubs. When I was in the university, I was that level clubs. And then I ended up going to be involved with organizations and other levels. I worked with the American Public Health Association. I started cross-disciplining things. And that has been my life's work until we are now really involved with the justice programs for all nurses, with all ethnic nurses, and not just focusing it on one particular ethnicity at a time. So it's people skills, it's clubs. I worked hard in the sorority. I learned a lot from important women in the United States, like those of you who know who Dorothy Height was, who started the National Council. She sort of mentored me from when I was in 1948 when I met her. That's a long time ago. Dorothy and I've known since 1948, and she kind of helped me. And my mother worked in those federated clubs, and I just came to a system of being involved with these Black women's clubs who helped to train us in another way and engage us and say we could always make change and that we had something to offer. So I just used a little different approach. And then I started working with other African American activities and their efforts to work together. The engineers and architects who were of other ethnicities were having no response back in the early days and could not be included. And they were excluded, in fact. And I had a lot of opportunity to help and work with the organization, creating the National Organization of Minority Architects, because my husband was an architect. And so they're just all kind of, I think, ways that we can use ourselves and that we have used ourselves. And everybody had a niche. They had some place to go and use their talents and have contributed to the progress that we made today. And I can continue to hope that we have more movement towards equity and justice in healthcare for everybody.
Great.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Dr. Nichols.
I would start by reminding you that 2/3 of the world is non-white and non-Christian. And the majority of the 28 million nurses in the world who practice nursing are women of color. You forget that when you're in America. And so I think the biggest challenge that nursing has in America is to see healthcare through that equity lens and to sort of restate Martin Luther King's observation that nurses of the world, particularly nurses of color, want to be judged as they provide care, not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their practice that they bring, which is comprehensive care to people, regardless of race, ethnicity, and religion. And I always like to remind American nurses who tend to see nursing through a white lens. And I just like to remind you, 1 billion population in India. Guess what? The majority of nurses in India are Indian. 1 billion population in China.
Right.
Guess what? The majority of nurses in China are Chinese. So forth in Africa. So my wish for the profession is to understand the value of having a health equity lens as we move on in the 21st century and use really this profession that comes to us from antiquity to a new century to create an enduring profession that really helps all of humanity. That's what really nursing is about. And so I have always felt privileged really to be in this circle of privilege to serve mankind and to serve humanity. And I think the best characteristic you can have is respect. Aretha said it first and last. RESPECT, respect. We need respect for care, for the people that we work with, respect. So I think that's our enduring legacy that needs to support us in a new day in the 21st century of nursing. Now, wouldn't my speech teacher be good? Give me, do I get an A? She would be good. See, I gave you inspiration. I wasn't whining.
We appreciate that. Dean Wykle.
Well, one of the things that I like to say to nurses is travel. That's how I learned a lot about all the healthcare systems all over the country, and that we need to know that everything is not like it's right here at home, and how people do nursing. And my best advice to nurses is that you need a mentor, because I certainly survived because I always had a mentor. And when I was dean, I wanted all the faculty to always have a mentor. Someone can help you to see. And then you have to think about where you want to go. And everybody doesn't have to have a master's degree, but you need to be able to have the qualifications that you need for doing what you want to do. If you want to go on and be promoted, if you want to be a dean or whatever you need to be, find out what that is that you need, and then follow that. But I really do believe in mentorship, and that it does help new nurses. And I do advise you to try different things, because I knew I could never be a pediatric nurse, but I always thought psych was the thing to do. And so that's what I would say in terms of, and nurses are becoming more involved in boards and health care and looking at, and I think this latest move for health equity and DEI committees is really helping. And as I said, when I first went into nursing, I'd never seen a black nurse. And to come from a small town, and it was like, and to demonstrate. And so I think that nurses are role models. How many people say I became a nurse because when I was a kid, I had a nurse that took care of me? And that's one of the things I think you should always remember, that as a nurse, you are a role model, and you're a role model for good health care. If you don't have good health care, you can't live to be 100. So that's what I would say for young nurses.
Thank you. I'm going to forfeit my last question to see if there's a question from the audience. If anyone has a pressing question, I know we had Dedra, Trefine, and Maureen who were collecting any questions. Okay, wow. Well, our esteemed guests will be here afterwards in the reception. Dr. Williams, we wish that you could join us. We'll have to give you a rain check for the next time you're here at Francis Payne Bolton. But now I would like to move to the next part of our program, and I would like Ms. Angela Campbell to grace us, Mrs. Angela Carpenter to grace us with Lift Every Voice.
Good afternoon, everyone. Testing. Okay. Well, I bring you greetings from the Alumni Association with Case Western Reserve University, and I give honor to all of you on this evening. I've been asked to render this song, the Negro National Anthem. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Oh, sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Thank you.
Beautiful voice. Wow. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Angela. That was beautiful. Is Mrs. Cookie Shade in the building? Would you please grace us with your vocal selection?
Good afternoon, everybody. This has been very intriguing, I must say. And I just want to say we stand on the shoulders of greats, whether we're nurses or the staff people here. I mean, we all can attest to the greatness of these shoulders that we stand on because of the shoulders that they stand on, and so on and so forth. So I couldn't find a song. So it finally came to me that none of this would be possible if it wasn't for the higher power within them to lead them where they needed to be, to order their steps. So it's about the goodness of the Lord in their lives that have brought them this far and will take them all the way. So this song is entitled, "The Goodness of God." I love you, Lord, for your mercy never failed me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. Yes, you have. And all my life you have been so good. And every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest nights. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father, known you as a friend, and I have lived in the goodness of God. Hey, 'cause all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after me. All my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I'm gonna sing, oh yes, all my life you have been faithful. Yes, you have. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God. I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God.
Thank you so much, Cookie.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nichols, Dr. Williams, and Dean Wykle, for sharing your experience and your wisdom. You have inspired all of us with your confidence, persistence, and your trailblazing spirit. And thank you, Ms. Carpenter and Mrs. Shade, and thank you, Dr. Warner, for moderating. And thank you to our audience who are in person as well as online. Now, as this is the kickoff event for our Centennial Year, we will be having monthly programs. And the next program is sponsored by the Marion K. Shaughnessy Leadership Academy, and it will host Peg Fitzgerald, who is an entrepreneur, and that will be on March 29th, and more information on that will be forthcoming. And don't forget, our Centennial Gala will be the weekend of homecoming on October 14th. Now I invite all of you to join us in the South Winter Garden for a reception. Thank you all so much.